I know, I've heard this before, I know what's going to happen here. Or for you, if you're speaking and you're simply downloading a story, and it's not a unique, it's just, I'm just, so if somebody says, how do I get from here to Graceland Shopping Center? Okay, listen to me. You go down 23, and that's downloading. And I'm hearing it that way, and I'm speaking that way. I know how to get to Graceland. I know what this meeting's going to be. And it's listening from within me to something I think I already know. Probably you don't. But that's the posture we take in terms of the listening and the speaking.
And that's how our relationships get quite calcified, right? Because I know what you're going to say, I know how you said it, I know why you said it that way. We have our own spiel about the person talking to us that we just download right onto them, and they're listening. And so it actually doesn't allow us to see anything if there is something different from them that day, or if there is something for us to know, or it begins to, I think it doesn't allow for any shift in relationship and work. And I also think that sometimes that's just what we need to do. That my son needs to download to me about Star Wars Battlefront. I sincerely do not need to listen to him. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I just need to let him go. And that's fine, right? But it's a choice, right? And so this thing about downloading is, sometimes it does a disservice to the work, and sometimes it's just what you need to do. But it's worth noticing, like, oh, I'm just like, you're just wah, 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 and I'm just listening. Or I'm just giving you my spiel because I talked about, think about the questions your patients ask you every day that you're like, okay, here's what we need to do. You know what I mean? Like, we all have these downloads and spiels, and sometimes that's useful, but it doesn't necessarily shift things.
Sometimes I've done check-ins with groups of people where what needs to happen, because of what just happened or what happened the night before or what have you, the check-in really does need to be a download, just to get it out. And it's not so important what the content is. Legitimate use of speaking and listening, downloading. Second level is factual. And typically this is just a little bit more opening than the downloading, but we're listening for facts, especially disconfirming facts. So I'm listening to you talk, and I'm not listening to your emotion necessarily. I'm not listening to your or seeing your body. I'm not necessarily seeing you, but I'm listening for the facts. And I'm listening particularly for the facts that are disconfirming of my beliefs. And that's where there's a beginning of a bit of opening. So we're here to debate. Not the one who's lately. Anyway. But a good debate, we'll be listening to it for, I never knew that. That's interesting data about the Antarctic. And so I'm looking at, and my world is opening up a little bit, and I'm listening for that kind of information, or I'm delivering that kind of information. I might be delivering a talk in which I'm hoping that the data is going to be disconfirming for people to start to think differently about something that we're working with, that we're dealing with. But it's actually a frame, a view of how we're listening, and also a view of how we're speaking.
Yeah, and I think if you're lucky, people say, oh, that's disconfirming data, let me consider that. Often what they'll do is go like, nope, that doesn't fit, or this is why that data that you gave that's disconfirming is wrong, right? So I think it depends on the openness. Right? Disconfirming data can be really important, right, if people are open to it, but often, in ourselves even, often what comes up is, nope, that's wrong because. I don't even quite, I let it in enough to know that it doesn't fit with what I think, but I really just push it back out on why that's wrong. So that's the debate element, right? So I'm listening to debate or rebut or defend or...
And so we show that by not so much me-centric, but it's still pretty much me. I've moved out to the edge so I can hear some disconfirming information. It starts to open me up, but it's still within my universe of judging, this makes sense, this doesn't make sense. then there's empathic listening and empathic speaking. Empathic listening is, you've all been trained, I'm quite certain, in empathic listening. How do I listen in a way that I can stand in the other person's shoes? That I can, as they speak or I'm observing them, I can be with their pain. I can be with their happiness. I can be in their shoes. Where I remove myself and I'm listening to you from you. And I'm trying to be that with you. I've often said, as I'm trained as a psychologist, and early in my life I did do some therapy. That was the gold standard. The gold standard of therapists in those days was empathic listening. Empathic speaking is often the reflection back. I'm seeing you in lots of pain. You seem to be really happy today. But we're not operating from our own ego. We're actually clearing that and listening from outside. And as I said, for me, I went through a lot of training to be able to consistently hear in an empathetic way what a client was saying to me. You, I'm sure, have been trained to be able to hear your patients from that space.
Yeah, and I mean, the truth is that we can all be different, a little bit different, right? Like, so, with our friends saying, if everyone checked in a little bit different, if we all listened empathically to each other, the world would be a different place, right? If we could set aside what we're thinking and truly try to get in someone else's shoes. I think with this model, it's like, that's fantastic, and there's something more.
The fourth level of listening was actually, for me, quite new, not so much in the experience of it, but the naming of it. And this gets to this question we were talking about before, about flow, that you were speaking of. And this is what Otto talks about, sensing from the emerging future, in which I and everything around me is being sensed, and I am in a state of real openness and awareness. So I walk into that room. It's not, what I didn't hear you say was, when I walked in the room and I saw what was happening, immediately a download happened of how to solve that. What I heard you saying is I walked in the room and I could see it all. Things slowed down, and I could actually sense what needed to happen. Someone that I was coaching last year from the PLA, it was probably the fourth coaching session we had. I was listening to her, and all of a sudden I had this real strong sense of what her emerging future was starting to look like. What I was sensing in her, it was reverberating in me. I could feel myself in some kind of a flow with a lot of things. There was a lot of information available to me, and there was a sense of, can I just play this with you? I have a feeling that this is the kind of thing that's who you are is emerging here, and I just want to play it back to you. It wasn't empathy. It went from being empathic with her to sensing her, having had 4 sessions with her, sensing her, and working with what was inside of me, as well as what I sense about the universe. And this is a hard one to really articulate, because it has that sense of flow. Those of us who've been athletes, we've experienced this. It's the time for me it was basketball, it was a time on the floor when I could see everything, and the whole game would slow down. And I knew exactly where somebody was going to move, and I knew where the pass needed to go. And there was nothing about that was intelligent. It was completely sensing the future as it was going to emerge, and it would happen that way. We've all been in it. It's hard to even describe it. But if we listen, beyond being empathic to you, but I'm listening to the whole of you, with the whole of me, with the whole of context, we'll often enter into this space of being generative, where we start to see the future begin to emerge. And so, over the course of these 10 months, and we'll really bring this to a big highlight in the April retreat. In a lot of ways, we're building toward this capacity to be generative in our lives, in our work, in our hearing, and in our speaking, where we can sense. This is really a sensing modality. It's not a thinking modality. It's a sensing modality. And if you're quiet, enter a place of stillness, enter a space of quiet, oftentimes you can sense what's emerging. I said it yesterday in my check-in. Janice and I were talking about it earlier. About 3 years ago, I was in an exercise around Theory U, doing a solo walk for a day along the Cape, and I had a very clear sense that there was this clear message about, it was before my granddaughter was born, so it must have been about 4 years ago, about grandfatherness, and that being a role for me in the world. And it's kind of, that's interesting. And it is emerging big time. And it was just, could be sensed. So you can do that with yourself. You can, in the quiet times, begin to say, what's emerging here in me that I'm not necessarily causing to have happen?
I think I'll just tell a quick story about these 4 levels to try to, because I think we know it, like as you're talking about it, I feel like we know it. I want to share about going through those 4 levels. So I was getting trained to do this, and part of the project was to go out and talk with different folks who were interested in climate change. Now, climate change isn't my issue, right? But I mean, I was happy to go out and be part of the project, and I was getting trained in this work. So I went out to interview someone who works at a nonprofit in Nova Scotia, and they work on climate change issues. And before we go out there, they say to us, now funding in Canada is slightly different. This nonprofit is 90% government funded out of like something like the energy department, right? And also I'm like, well, how are you gonna fund something when they're trying to work against what you're doing? You know what I mean? Like I already have this like thing happening in my brain about whether this is legitimate work or not, right? So I go and I do the interview with someone. It was a 2-hour interview, like just to say it wasn't like a 30-second kind of thing. It was a 2-hour interview. And as I start talking with this woman, she starts saying that, oh, and this blah blah, and you know, she's clearly giving me her spiel, right? And I don't even actually understand enough about climate change to understand much about her spiel. So I'm just kind of like letting it come on in. That's great. That's fine. And then she starts talking to me about their work and how effective they are. And I immediately go back to, how effective can you be advocating against your government when they're 90% of your income, right? Like that's not, I don't actually really think that that's possible. I'm really glad you do good work. You think you're doing good work, but I don't know that I think, right? So I just had this little debate with her. She had no idea, to be fair. I wasn't talking about her. I was just asking questions. Like, I'm just asking questions and I'm looking interested. But in my brain, I've got this whole dialogue going that's kind of debating what she's saying, even though it's not even my issue, right? So, so she keeps talking, and as she's talking, I could feel us both kind of settling in, and she starts talking about this other group that's more grassroots, not getting government funding, and how they're wrong and they're not doing good work. And I thought, oh, I could actually just start to feel a little bit about her fear about this other group and what they were doing. And I started to see, like, in that I actually started to see her commitment to what she was doing. I started thinking, well, this isn't how I would do it, but actually, you know what, like, this person is pretty passionate about what they're doing. They're dedicated their life to it. And I started to get more empathic, right? And I understand why she's fearful about this other group, and I started to kind of get her. Not agree, but just kind of like get her. And so the interview continues, and we're sinking in, and I'm just listening. Once I got her, it just, for me, kind of unlocked something. I could just listen. I didn't have to argue with her in my head anymore. I didn't have to be right about it. I could just listen to her. And as she started talking more and more, we sank into this place where she started saying things like, I never really thought about that. Oh, maybe we could do that. And by the end of the interview, and again, I'm not saying much, friends. It was not my great interviewing skills, right? It was just, I was just asking questions. I was just listening. And by the end of the interview, she's thinking of new ideas. And she's like, oh, what about that? I never thought about that. And then by the end, she was like, and maybe we could ask that grassroots group to do this, because we're not actually able to do that. And she started making connections in her head that she hadn't had before. So in 2 hours, she got to this place of like real generativity about her work just by having someone listen to her, right? So it just shifted. And other people interviewed in this agency had the same experience. They came out talking, she's like, oh, we never thought about that. And that was important, and I feel like that was of service. But selfishly, what I got from that interview was I actually didn't ever think about activism the same again, right? Because I had come in with such a strong opinion about how funding flows and how it should work and how that makes you have integrity or not, that through her shift, I was able to shift. And I said, I only asked the interview questions. Nothing else happened. We did not engage in dialogue. There was no back and forth. It was me asking a question and simply listening until we settled. She changed and generated something more, and my own practice has never been the same since then. Even though it had nothing to do with my issues, nothing with, I mean, like I care about climate change. It was so amazing to me. The generation happened for her, but as a listener, it also happened for me.
So there's this quality of I and me. It. I and thou. Generativity, I and now. So that's what was happening when you were in that space. We can be, this doesn't just have to be a habit. If we practice being in now, we practice being present, this will show up. We actually practice being in the now, being in the present. Generativity will show up more.
Is that mostly a listening component, or is there a speaking piece of that as well?
For me, this is mostly a listening stance than a speaking stance.
What about how this works with us when we're interviewing patients and we have to interrupt them to ask questions? Doesn't this mess up the flow, and do we get to these same stages if we redirect them into a different?
So, Mike, I'm speculating, not you, but I'm speculating, that you're really fighting against I and me, that the factual, that I and it is really important. The I and thou is really important. And my speculation is this may happen afterwards when you're charting, where you actually have this kind of an experience. You may have it with the patient, but my guessing is it may happen upon reflection to the situation. It may happen in the present, but I'm guessing that those two are more prominent features of an intervention. There's nothing wrong with these. They're more prominent interventions, I would think, in the patient experience. I'm guessing, Mark, because you had been practicing this practice of nowness in going into the room, that this was probably more prominent for you.
Yes, and that's what I was going to say. I think that it's not time efficient, which is one of the things that we're working against. But it is hugely beneficial, and I can as I hear this again, I can start to think of times where get a generative change. It's what we all want our patients to do. How do we get them to take the medicine? How do we get them to take responsibility? How do we get them there? You can't make them. But if you get into this space, you don't have to do anything, because they start to generate their own ability to understand. And the simplest, easiest, concrete answer, not that I don't have this conversation with lots of individuals, or for that matter, for myself, but one patient, I got into a conversation that was truly a conversation, and I said to her at one point, I said, I have to tell you, I'm worried about you. Why? Because for the number of years I'm seeing you, your weight is really becoming more and more a problem, and I'm concerned that it's really going to impact you more than you realize. I don't remember the conversation per se, so I'm not doing a great job. But I have to tell you, it was a depth. It was not a, you have to. It was more of, how can we do something? The visit ended. It was an annual exam. She was back a year later, and she was 40 pounds lighter than she was before. It was dramatic. And I looked at her and I said, what happened? And she said, you remember that conversation that we had? I said, yeah. And she said, well, I don't know what, something just clicked in me. And she said, I decided that I could walk through that. She said, so I started it. And it was difficult at first, but I did it. And then as I did it, I found I wasn't as hungry. And because I wasn't as hungry, I thought, maybe I'll just buy more nutritious foods and eat less, but better stuff. It doesn't cost me. And it was just sort of this whole process. I didn't do anything, but it was being in that.
It wasn't a script, you didn't write a script
Nope.
for it. You didn't feel her, necessarily just feel her pain, but somehow
It was
connected.
exactly that. It was a connection, and one of my thoughts is, how in the world do I replicate that? No. But being able to, it's different. It's different with each person, but it is being able to get to that point and then allow something to emerge from it.
What I'm hearing so much from you right now is that's a tall order. Like, not because it's just unfamiliar, but because you let go of your power to be the fixer.
It
that's what I would think, but at some level,
I'm gonna say I cared, but in a deep sort of way.
but I think that's okay, right? But I mean, with that, I think it enables potentially her to recognize this is something that he really is feeling. I can see that, and it allows that felt to occur in which, or maybe it was, or it came up here and there was a difference, or maybe it was Jason's, if I remember what I'm talking about, where actions occur when things are felt. It was Jason who said it. So, not factually, but feeling was then a powerful motivator for her
Well,
to.
As I hadn't heard Tuesday's story before, as I'm hearing her story, I'm hearing and sensing what took place in what I experienced. So I'm seeing some similarities there, because it wasn't that I had asked the right questions. It wasn't that I, use your words, that you weren't the best in being an interviewer, but you were listening. And it was changing you at the same time.
So how do we do this in a time constraint? 15 minutes.
Well, so I don't know that the goal is to get the generative listening every patient all the time. Like, just to kind of name that, I think the goal is to try to have some experiences where you're able to be generative in your listening, notice, and think about, like Mark did, what was present here? Oh, deep care and concern. Can I bring more of that? And maybe you'll have more moments. I don't know that it's actually possible to live in this kind of generative listening all of the time with 20 patients a day. I think that there's really good work to be done in 2 and 3, right? It's like really deep work to be done. I think it's being open to the possibility of it. And I think the other thing I would wonder about is how can you be generative with your colleagues? That actually might begin to create a field in your space, like just to your point about it, where
Even potentially more beneficial.
right, so that you begin to impact the field, and that might happen more with your colleagues even, so that patients can walk into a place where this is actually a norm and happens, and we can deep into it. It's less tangible, it's more intangible.